Thanksgiving. It's the time for family, food, and fear. While most of us gather around the table to share what we're thankful for, horror movies have a different idea. For them, dinner is where terror is served. From meals in space gone awry, to delectable and disturbing dinner with the doctor. Horror filmmakers have found ways to twist the comfort of the dinner table into something far more sinister. So today we're going to dig into some of the most memorable food and dinner scenes in horror films. And just a warning, some of these are quite disgusting, so you might want to put the fork down. Well, we might as well start off with the movie that gave me the idea in the first place. Alien is my all-time favorite horror film, and has a spaceship crew investigating a derelict spacecraft, only to come into contact with a creature of unknown origin. The creature attaches itself to the face of Cain, and once it eventually falls off, everything seems normal. That is until they enjoy one last meal before heading home, and it must have laid an egg or embryo in his chest because a goddamn xenomorph bursts its way out in one of the most memorable scenes in horror movie history. This thing must really not like Chinese food. I remember first seeing this back when I was 9 years old, and it scared the hell out of me. It didn't just freak me out either, because Veronica Cartwright, the actress who played Lambert, knew what the puppet was going to look like, but had no idea about the explosion of blood. So when it came flying out, her reaction was genuine. As great as the scene is, we also can't forget about the parody version from Spaceballs, which brought back John Hurt to reprise his role, and it's just hilarious.
Oh no, not again.
Now, the scene in Signs I want to mention isn't disturbing or gross, or really even scary. It's more heartbreaking than anything. Signs is about an Episcopal priest played by Mel Gibson who loses his faith after the death of his wife. Later, strange things begin to happen, and it turns out aliens may be invading Earth. Near the climax of the film, the family gets together to have what might be their last meal, and you can sense how scared and hopeless they all feel. The children want to say a prayer before they eat, but Gibson's character refuses. The family argues, but they really are just terrified and don't know what else to do at this point. It's a really good and emotional scene for what is a very hit and miss film.
Now we are going to enjoy this meal. No one can stop us from enjoying this meal, so enjoy it!
From a sad family moment to a dream-stalking demon, man, this list is like Whiplash. A Nightmare on Elm Street 5: The Dream Child really needs no introduction. It's Freddy Krueger doing Freddy Krueger things. In this fifth entry in the series, Freddy kills a young teen by overfeeding her until she chokes to death, basically creating YouTube mukbangs in the process. Greta was a model whose mother was always on her about what she ate because she didn't want her daughter getting fat. So Freddy took this fear and turned it up to 11. This is a pretty disgusting scene. I don't really enjoy watching people stuff their faces full of food. It's actually even more disgusting in the uncut version that hasn't been released on DVD or Blu-ray, because Freddy is literally feeding Greta her own insides.
Bon appetit, bitch!
And because we're on A Nightmare on Elm Street, we might as well mention the Soul Pizza from Part 4 The Dream Master. As Alice's friends are killed off, Freddy decides to torment her with a pizza full of her friends' souls. It's a pretty gross little moment, and will have you looking at meatball pizzas very differently.
I love soul food.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most iconic horror films of the 1970s. It features a group of friends who discover a creepy, abandoned house after stopping because they're low on gas. Except the house isn't abandoned, and it's home to a deeply disturbed family that likes to make chili of any trespassers. The ending of the film features a dinner scene with the final girl Sally, as she basically just screams bloody murder for like 5 minutes straight. I understand why she's screaming, but after a while it becomes so annoying that I'm like, Leatherface, just give me the chainsaw so I can end this nightmare. Even though it drives me nuts, the scene is pretty iconic, and I think almost every sequel and remake has its own version, but none can match the grittiness of the original. House of a Thousand Corpses might as well be considered a remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre because it's basically the same movie. You've got some young 20-somethings and Dwight from The Office traveling around looking for weird roadside attractions for a book they're writing. One of their tires blows out and they're brought to the Firefly farm, where obviously things don't go well for them. Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a dinner scene as well, but this one is a little more uncomfortable. It's basically the friends all learning about the Fireflies and a local legend called Dr. Satan. while we get shots of bizarre flashbacks that couldn't possibly be real, and Baby who's with some dead cheerleaders, so we know our leads are kind of in trouble. There's another brief scene later in the movie once things go south, where the largest member of the family is eating a bowl of Agatha Christie's cereal, which is a fun play on Agatha Christie, but the way he eats the cereal is kind of gross. Speaking of gross, we have Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead. Before Peter Jackson would go on to direct the greatest film trilogy of all time, that being Lord of the Rings, he got his start in horror films, and one of these horror films was his zombie splatterfest Dead Alive, considered to be one of the goriest and most absurd movies of all time. Dead Alive is about a Sumatran rat monkey that is captured on Skull Island, which is funny because Peter Jackson would later direct King Kong. If this creature bites you, well, you turn into a zombie. It's one of the bloodiest movies you'll ever see, but the grossest part in the film is the dinner scene, which involves custard. Custard already makes me gag, but this scene takes it to the next level. I don't even want to really show much or really get into it because it's just so nasty. There's also a dinner scene later on in the film that involves zombies, which is pretty funny, and has some zombies shaboinking. So this one is definitely for the family. Now, Beetlejuice isn't exactly a scary movie, but for younger kids, I think it has its moments. But if you know anything about Beetlejuice, then you know exactly where I'm going with this. Beetlejuice is about a couple that dies, they come back as ghosts, and aren't happy when a new family moves into their home, so they do whatever they can to get rid of them. Well, except for the daughter Lydia, who they take a liking to. At one point, the family is having some people over for dinner, so the ghosts decide to possess them and cause everyone to sing Deo, the Banana Boat song by Harry Belafonte. It's a pretty funny scene and one of the most memorable of the entire movie. I love the looks on everyone's faces when they're singing and dancing, but still aware that they're not exactly willfully doing these things. Poltergeist is a little more on the spooky side when compared to Beetlejuice. It follows a family that moves into a new house only to discover it's haunted. There's some funny, creepy moments throughout the movie, but there's one scene that is pretty nasty. At one point, one of the paranormal investigators, who's been staying with the family to help them uncover what is happening, decides to fix himself a little snack. He grabs a steak from the fridge, and when he turns around, it's suddenly moving on its own. It gets grosser when the steak explodes and what looks like chewed up meat or organs begin to spill from it. And that chicken drumstick he was just eating, oh well, it's covered in maggots. This is a really gross scene, but imagine thinking you can just go into someone's fridge and cook yourself up one of their steaks. What happens after this is actually even worse, because he begins to tear away at his face. And might I remind everyone, this movie is rated PG, a classic scene in a classic movie. Alright, so this might be the most fucked up addition to this list. Back in the early to mid 2000s, I went through a phase of buying and watching as many Asian horror films as I could, and one of those was a movie called 3 Extremes. 3 Extremes is an anthology horror film with 3 short films from 3 different directors. The most disturbing of the bunch was a short film called Dumplings. Dumplings is about a former actress that has started to age, and she's willing to do anything to turn back the clock. And that anything is eating these very special dumplings with a very special ingredient. Now, what is this ingredient, you might be asking yourself? Well, honestly, I can't say because of YouTube, but it's something you might find in a dumpster behind a back alley. Maybe taken out with a rusty coat hanger. Who knows? I have no idea, but I think you get the picture. The short messed me up for a good while after watching it, and it's not something I would ever watch again. The best part though is my DVD copy of 3 Extremes came with the full feature-length version of Dumplings as a special feature. Yeah, there's a full 90-minute version of this movie that has different subplots and even a different ending. And after reading about the differences, nah, I'm good. I don't need to see that. I don't recommend this movie to anyone, and let's move the hell on. Oh, thank God. Now this is a palate cleanser we all needed. The Lost Boys is a classic 80s vampire movie. It's fun, it's scary, it's campy as hell, and it has the buff, oiled up saxophone guy. What more could you want? The movie is about two brothers who move with their mother to the town of Santa Carla, California, only to discover it's crawling with vampires. Older brother Michael gets smitten with a young lady and ends up getting involved with said vampires, leading to a scene where they all sit around and enjoy some Chinese food. Except the vampires trick Michael and make him think he's eating maggots and then worms. It's a gross scene for sure, but after some of the previous ones we've already talked about, it pales in comparison.
You're eating maggots, how do they taste?
Slither is a movie all about eating. It's basically James Gunn ripping off the much better 80s horror film Night of the Creeps. It's about these slugs from outer space that get inside your brain and turn you into a mindless zombie. A lot of the movie is just watching Michael Rooker and other characters stuff their faces full of raw meat until at one point they literally explode. Yes, a woman in the movie becomes so engorged on meat that she explodes and millions of those slugs come pouring out of her body. It's pretty gross overall, but it's done in a cheesy, tongue-in-cheek kind of way that makes it easier to stomach. Still though, I'd probably put the fork down before digging into this one. Well, now this is a festive movie. Santa's Sleigh is about Satan who loses a bet with an angel and is forced to spread Christmas cheer as Santa. It's a horror comedy that focuses much more on the comedy than it does the horror. Professional wrestler Goldberg plays Santa and does a great job in the role. Now, why I bring this movie up is because it has one of the best openings to any movie ever, and I really mean that. It starts with the most miserable family you've ever seen. They all hate each other, they talk shit, they cheat, they look down on poor people. They're all just scumbags. Well, thankfully Santa arrives and puts an end to their Christmas feast in the best way imaginable. Seriously, any movie that kills Chris Kattan is easily a 10 out of 10. Now, 7 isn't nearly as holly jolly as Santa's Sleigh, but it's up there. 7 is about two detectives that are on the trail of a serial killer who murders people based on the 7 deadly sins. The first of these murders is based on the sin of gluttony, as a very large man was forced to eat until his stomach burst and he died. The whole scene is just disgusting, from the griminess of the apartment to the bucket full of vomit that Brad Pitt's character discovers. It's truly horrific. Just imagine the smell. There's no way that place didn't smell like a nightmare from the moment they walked inside. The worst part is the guy was fed canned spaghetti. Could the killer at least made it homemade? Soylent Green is an absolute classic, and spoilers for the ending of the movie because this edition deals with its twist ending. The film takes place in a dystopian future where things like pollution, overpopulation, and global warming have led to the oceans dying, and all life on Earth is on the brink of extinction. Because of this, the main food source for everyone, well, the poor mostly, are these cracker-like foods called Soylent Green. They're made from plankton and are processed by the Soylent Corporation. Except while Charlton Heston's character is on a murder investigation, he discovers that they've been lied to and the true ingredient is people. Yes, the Soylent Corporation has been turning people into food, and everyone has been consuming it. I guess that's one way to deal with overpopulation and hunger. The ending is one of the most shocking twists in movie history, but it's so ingrained in pop culture that I think most people know it without even having seen it.
You gotta tell him Soylent Green is people!
The Stuff is a really strange B-movie from the 80s about commercialism. It's about this strange white fluffy goop that's discovered, and because it tastes sweet, it's immediately packaged and sold to the public. I do love that the moment it's discovered, the first thing someone does to it is try to eat it. What's with humans trying to eat something the moment they find it? As people eat the stuff, they become more zombie-like and want more and more. Eventually it turns out that the stuff is actually alive and is slowly eating the people that have consumed it. It's basically The Blob, but with marshmallow fluff. Nothing But Trouble was a fever dream from my childhood. I honestly thought for the longest time that I just made the movie up in my mind. I remembered seeing this bizarre movie with Dan Aykroyd as an old man and Chevy Chase and Demi Moore and thinking it was fake, but no, it's real. It's about two rich snobs that get caught speeding and are brought in to see the judge, which is Dan Aykroyd in old age makeup with a nose that kind of looks like a penis. Anyways, Chevy Chase and Demi Moore are forced to have dinner with the judge and his family, and it's kinda gross. To make things worse, they have no idea that the food they're being served is made from people. A truly bizarre movie and sometimes considered one of the worst ever made. But there's so much weirdness that happens throughout that I think it's kind of interesting.
How do you like your dog, folks?
Hannibal is an obvious addition. I mean, he's a serial killer cannibal. Hannibal is the 2001 sequel to one of the most influential movies ever made, The Silence of the Lambs. And does it do that movie justice? Well, not really. It goes the 80s slasher movie route by adding more gore to the mix instead of focusing on a compelling story, which is fine for Friday the 13th, but not for Silence of the Lambs. There is one really gross scene in the movie, however, when Ray Liotta's character is fed his own brain. Hannibal Lecter removes his skull, slices off a piece of his brain, cooks it, and then feeds it to him. I don't know if you can eat part of your own brain and survive, but I don't want to find out. Even nastier, right at the end of the film, Hannibal feeds a piece of the brain to a little boy. A pretty gross scene in a subpar film.
This? That I don't think you would like.
It is based off the classic book by Stephen King. It has a group of friends being terrorized by an evil clown, and then 27 years later, when they're all adults, they come back together to put an end to it once and for all. In the second part of the TV miniseries, the group reunites and enjoys themselves at a Chinese restaurant when their fortune cookies become pure nightmare fuel. They become filled with bugs, eyeballs, weird pincers, baby birds. It's all pretty unsettling. The best part is when one of the workers comes over to check on them, and they have to act really cool like they aren't seeing some really weird shit. It Chapter 2 from 2019 does the same scene, but it's way over the top with cheap looking CGI, and it has none of the impact. It's just louder and more in your face. The original scene from 1990 is way better and way creepier.
Let's get the hell out of here.
When Rocky Horror first came out, it was hated by pretty much everyone, but as time went on, it became a big cult hit and would sell out night after night, with people dressing up and acting out the scenes in the audience. I've watched it one time, so my memory is a bit rusty, but I remember something about a couple's car breaking down and then looking for help and meeting Tim Curry's character. But there's a scene with the late great Meatloaf where he comes out on a motorcycle and after a song and dance is killed by Tim Curry. Later on in the movie, the guests are all served dinner only to find out they're being served meatloaf. The actor, not actual meatloaf.
That's a rather tender subject. Another slice, anyone?
This is funny because there's an episode of Tales from the Crypt called What's Cookin' that stars Meatloaf, and in it he's killed and served to unknowing diner patrons. Poor guy could not catch a break.
You killed Mr. Chumley!
Yes, okay, I killed him. Just hold that door open.
Psycho is one of the greatest movies ever made. Directed by legendary Alfred Hitchcock, the story follows Marion Crane, who is on the run after embezzling money from her employer. She ends up at Bates Motel, the last place she should be, run by the mentally unstable Norman Bates, a man who has deep mommy issues. There's a tense scene where Norman prepares Marion a meal while discussing taxidermy and his love for his mother. This moment foreshadows what's to come, especially when the camera angle shifts to show birds looming above Norman, hinting that he's not just talking about stuffing birds. This scene also features some of the movie's most iconic lines of dialogue, and I don't know how the hell Marion could have any kind of appetite in such an uncomfortable situation.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Well, there we have it. A bunch of terrifying food/dinner scenes in horror films. There are tons more I could have added, and a lot that I didn't simply because they were too disgusting, like Human Centipede or Sallow. How's about the monkey brain from Faces of Death? I purposefully left these off because I thought they were far too gross. Plus, dumplings sort of filled that quota anyways. But what are some of your favorite food or dinner scenes from horror movies, or just movies in general? Let me know down in the comments. Anyways, that's all for today, folks. I hope all you Americans have a happy Thanksgiving, and if you're like me and you already had yours, or you just don't celebrate, well, I hope you have a great day regardless. Oh, and I almost forgot. Stay spooky.
They're eating her! And then they're going to eat me!